I'm going to go over ways to address conflict and resistance, and this is directly aligned with your chapter 9 in your Morawski and Spencer book. Um, Please make sure that you read that before our scheduled simulation activity. It will help you tremendously. Okay, so why do we have to talk about conflict and resistance? Well, for starters, it is really important to acknowledge that everyone has a different frame of reference. It's really important to also understand that collaboration can be difficult. Not everyone is naturally inclined to be a team player. But we also know that collaboration is a huge component of the teaching field, and therefore we do need to have our collaboration skills up to par to make sure that we are collaborating with everyone. Um, we're also going to discuss how do we resolve problems when they come up, and just different tips that you can also use during the simulation, as well as the skills that you will need to successfully work through conflict and resistance. So let's go ahead and talk about frame of reference. Um, as I mentioned earlier, it is really important to acknowledge that everyone has a different frame of reference, and we can never assume we understand others' choices. The choices that individuals make depend on their specific frame of reference. So, what is this frame of reference? Well, it refers to one's past experiences, acquired attitudes and beliefs, cultural experiences, personal qualities, past and present feelings, and expectations for others. All of these, think of it as different ingredients that, when are put together, make who you are. They influence how you will react to situations. They will influence your opinions and your actions. And it affects what and how one observes and perceives a situation. Um, so it's really important that we acknowledge that we all have a unique frame of reference, and also remember that during the simulation, because um, Mr. Murphy may have a very specific frame of reference that may be influencing his reaction to you, Casey, during the simulation. So always ask yourself, how might my frame of reference cause me to misunderstand this situation? You're absolutely, um, there's validity in the way that you will respond to a situation, but also acknowledge that your experiences, your personal qualities and cultural experiences can definitely influence the way that you are reacting to a situation, or perhaps may misunderstand a situation. Okay, so when it comes to conflict resolution, um, let's go ahead and start off by just kind of defining what it is. So, conflict resolution is a constructive approach to interpersonal and intergroup conflicts that helps people with opposing positions work together to arrive at mutually acceptable and compromisable solutions. Conflict exists whenever incompatible activities occur. So again, we will all, because we're in this field of education, um, come across conflict. But at the same time, if we do not address the conflict in a professional manner, then at the end of the day, it will be our students who miss out on a great education. So it's really important that we really learn these conflict resolution skills. So, if resistance isn't addressed and the change happens, then it can turn into, you guessed it, conflict. So we need to ensure that as professionals, we address the resistance. We don't, kind of just talk around it. And before we enact a change, we need to ensure that we speak to the stakeholders that this might impact to ensure that we avoid conflict. So, here are a couple of indicators of resistance. Okay, so the person may be refusing to participate, or they might be supporting you without substance. They might also be displacing responsibility, deferring to future time, or relying on past practices. Any of these could come up during the simulation, so be prepared to recognize them and know how to address them. So, here are a couple of examples for each one. Refusing to participate would look like this: I don't think I'm ready for this. Sorry. Supporting without substance could look like this: That's a great idea. I'll get with you next week to discuss it. I'll call you. Really? Let's Zoom. Displacing responsibility will look like this: I don't think my students' parents would like it. So you are essentially negating to go along with the situation that's being proposed or the action that is being proposed, but you are kind of putting the blame of who is not going to be okay with it on someone else. Deferring to future time, good idea. Let's think about it for next semester. And then before we know it, next semester is here and we are still in the same spot. Or relying on past practice. You know what they say: if it ain't broke, or this has never worked in the past, or we tried it like that 5 years ago and it was not successful, so I think it's best that we keep it the way that it is now. So those are kind of just indicators that there is resistance occurring. So it's really important that we go ahead and learn to recognize them. Okay, so when you recognize that resistance is coming up, your best tool is to use persuasion. Make sure that you consider the following, though. Is the resistance warranted? Will the change really happen that you are suggesting? Is there time to make the change? What might be impacting the person's frame of reference? In other words, what past experiences have they had that may make them more resistant to whatever actions you are suggesting? What communication skills will you employ? Well, during persuasion, it's really important that you listen actively, that you are also in an environment that is not going to be too distracting, that you are asking questions, because then that allows the student, excuse me, your colleague to know that you are listening. Provide statements and provide, kind of mediation, meeting halfway with the other person. You may decide not to address this at all and just kind of sweep it under the rug, but we all know that when that occurs, then the problem just becomes larger. So it is best to just professionally address this and, really try to see and meet the person halfway. Okay, so a couple of steps to avoid conflict. Really make sure that you treat the other person with respect. And I know it can be difficult if the other person is either raising their voice or they're just being very negative, but don't stoop to that level. Make sure that you are still treating that other person with respect. Make sure that you establish parity and equity. And the reason being is because if you are coming into a meeting and you are coming across as someone that doesn't value the other person, doesn't see them as an equal, then that tone is already being established and you're not going to be very successful in mediating the situation. Create an agenda with some clear goals. So let that be kind of like the anchor because it could be really difficult when you are in a meeting with someone. There is conflict and it can be really easy to kind of get off track, start talking about other things. So that's why it is best that you have an agenda and kind of just what is our objective for today, because you can always reference back to that and it'll help you map out and just kind of write some action steps in place. Okay, and also look for common ground. more than likely you and that other person that you're having conflict with have something in common, whether it is a hobby or, being a parent or loving a specific genre of movies, whatever it is. Try to find that common ground, because sometimes that will be your in to with that person to try to start mediating a conflict. Okay. Um, Whenever possible, separate the people from the problem. I know it's really easy sometimes when there is a issue, a challenge, to lump the people that are affiliated with that problem and kind of put them all together. That is not the best thing to do because it will just magnify the issues and the conflict that you have. It's also really important, again, to focus on the interest and not positions. It is not the time to have an ego. It is really important that you put that ego to the side and you focus on what is at stake and what is, again, that objective that we're focusing on. Look for options for mutual gain, not just, something that you are trying to make happen, but also what is it that the other person can gain by being part of the solution instead of the conflict. I kind of already touched upon this, but really important that you manage your emotions. Try to remain as neutral as possible, because otherwise, it's not only not professional, but it's also whenever you start showing emotions, it will kind of like detract from the concerns at hand. Create objective criteria and listen. Don't listen to just get ready to speak, but truly listen. And you can do those listening skills by summarizing, paraphrasing, and we're going to discuss that in a little bit. Again, clearly communicate what the issue or problem is. Do not just talk around it because then we're not really addressing it directly. Brainstorm solutions together, and there should not be any judgment. Sometimes the best ideas come from just this free brainstorming that can occur. So please let that just happen. Determine, again, viable options both of you can agree on and implement the options and agree to check and see if things are better. That's always kind of just a nice professional follow up in terms of like, is this working for both of us? And if it's not, let's go back to the drawing board. Okay, so important considerations in problem solving. This is a great way to prepare for the case study simulation on page 132 in Morawski and Spencer's textbook. Make sure that you are looking at the following sections: identifying the problem, generating solutions, deciding on a solution collaboratively, implementing the solution, and evaluating the outcomes. Okay. And again, as I was stating earlier, use your best communication skills and really show that you're listening. And again, these can include the following: paraphrasing what the other person is saying. So this would look like, in other words, what I'm hearing you say is, also clarifying. It's really important that you ask clarifying questions to make sure that you're understanding the other person's perspective. And that can look like the following: can you tell me more about, X, Y, and Z? And then also mediating. So, like I have here on the slide, what that can look like is, what's another way that we could, or what do you think about X, Y, and Z? So, always listen, listen, and listen. Okay, so in the simulator, please bring along your the case study, any notes that you wrote in terms of how to address the avatar, because you never know if you will be chosen. Feel free to bring also these slides with you. Okay, so just be prepared with the background of the case, have the case study readily available, as I said, and just bring your best A game.